Welcome everyone to episode 5 of Let's Learn with Limbic, the show where I analyze my own replays in order to identify my mistakes so that we can both learn from them. Today we have a TVZ on the map Ohana. Our opponent is Phage, Avarice. Now, if you're wondering why we skipped ahead to 6 minutes into the replay, the reason is, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here if you've watched my other Let's Learn with Limbic's videos, but I'm going to reiterate it just in case you haven't seen it. And the reason that we skipped to 6 minutes into the replay is because, unless there was cheese in the game, or unless you're trying to learn a new build order, there's no point in watching the first few minutes of every single replay, because it's basically just you building workers. You will find that your analyzing replays becomes far more effective if you just go ahead and skip between somewhere between 6 and 8 minutes every single time. Unless, of course, there is cheese, in which case you obviously need to watch the earlier phases of the game, or unless you're trying to learn a new build order. So what are we going to talk about today in this episode of Let's Learn with Limbic? What I'd like to talk about today is the difference that a good engagement or a bad engagement can make in a fight, especially when you get to these late game 200 supply army versus 200 supply army fights. I think that a lot of, especially newer players, will only think about what they're fighting with and when they're fighting with it. So for example, you might think, okay, I've got some Marines, Medevacs, and Marauders, and I'm going to attack at 10 minutes. And I'm going to attack at 10 minutes. And that's all they'll really consider. But I think that what a lot of people don't even think about is where they're going to attack. And the answer at first might seem just like, well, I'm going to attack my opponent's base, obviously. But when you get into these really late games and both players probably have their armies out on the map, where you choose to attack can have a huge impact, and you're going to see that in this video. Both myself and my opponent are going to have very, very good engagements, and obviously if we both had good engagements, that means that we both also have to have terrible engagements, and you will see exactly how much of a difference that can make. Now, the fights actually don't start on in this replay for a while, so I'm just going to go ahead and speed it up so that we can get there. If you're wondering what's going on here, right now I'm concerned about my opponent doing some kind of cheese. That's why I'm just kind of sitting back in my natural, waiting for an attack to come. I've got some bunkers. These are things that you don't really need to concern yourself that much with. You can see here's the attack, and he realizes I'm well defended, and he just backs off. That's not what I really want the main focus of this video to be. Alright, looks like we're finally about to move out, and we can begin talking about the main content of this video. As soon as a fight starts, I'll go ahead and pause this and slow it down. Okay, looks like one's going to start relatively soon. Alright, okay, so here we've got a fight. Now, this engagement, despite what you might think after I let it play out and you see exactly how it turns out, his engagement is actually very good for my Zerg opponent. And here's why. Look at what we call the concave of his units. Look at the attack angle. See how, I can't really illustrate this very well just using the drag and select, but do you see how he has much more degrees to attack from? Say we had a compass here and we got to measure how much of a degree angle my opponent's units were covering. It is much larger than what my units are covering, if that makes any sense. So that means that he has many more angles to attack from, which is good in these kind of engagements, especially if your opponent has some kind of AoE, which we have widow mines and we have siege tanks. When you have a larger concave, it means that your units will be much more spread out, and it means that more of them will be able to attack at the same time more easily. If we slow this down to the slow speed, you will notice that my units in the back, do you see that? I'm going to hold down Alt to get rid of the health bars, but watch my units in the back over here. See how during this fight they're kind of just dancing around back there, not really attacking until the units in front of them actually die so that they can attack, and how all of my opponent's units were able to attack at once. That can be really, really significant. If half your army or even a third of your army is doing nothing during a fight, that army might as well not even be there. Now, even though I managed to win that fight, that engagement was much better for my opponent. And he's going to get another really great engagement coming up here soon enough. You can see that here, this engagement's not really too much in favor of either player. He gets a nice surround here, but that was already when he was winning the fight. Basically, he just has more supply. I just boost my medevacs out of here to retreat. I retreat back to my Widow Mines off the creep. Now, if you're wondering why I'm being much more available to step onto the creep right here than I normally would be, it's because when your opponent is going for a Roach Hydra, stepping on the creep is not nearly as bad as it is if they're going for Ling Bane. Obviously, you would rather take fights off of the creep, but it's nowhere near as important. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and speed it up again to the next fight that I would really like to talk about. This is going to be a really terrible engagement for me. You can see, if you look at our supplies, they're actually about equal, which is good for the Terran, especially since I have some siege tanks. Siege tanks are very supply efficient units, and roaches are very supply inefficient units. What does that mean? Well, it means that the reason why roaches are generally not considered very good late game is because each one takes up 2 supply, and they generally do not do enough to justify the fact that they take up 2 supply. Because obviously you would rather have different units like Hydralisks or maybe even Ultralisks or Broodlords, but that's obviously a little bit down the line. So when a player builds roaches, and builds a lot of roaches, they're generally looking to end the game a little quicker or transition out of those roaches relatively soon. So the fact that our supplies are almost equal is actually very good for me, and it means that I should, in theory, win pretty much any fight that I decide to take, as long as it's not a terrible engagement, which you're about to see. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and focus on my Zerg opponent here, and I would like to point out how he positions his army. So do you notice how he is splitting it off like this? I'll go ahead and rewind just a little bit to demonstrate that to you again. Most players will kind of just, when they have an army like this, just keep it in a ball, nice and clumped together, and never even think about it. However, just watch what our opponent here decides to do with his army. There it is. Do you see how he splits half of it off? This is so that he will be able to much more easily get the better concave, which we talked about a little earlier. He's trying to make sure that when a fight happens around here, he has all of this to attack from, all of these angles, whereas I'm kind of just being sandwiched here. And you know what? This strategy is going to work very well for him. So you can see he's just patiently waiting, and here it is. Here is when he says, alright, this is a great time to attack. I'm going to have you from so many angles, and this fight is going to look really great for me. Even though it shouldn't, because as I mentioned before, my army is much better than his. Now I'm going to go ahead and hide all of the health bars again, and I'm just going to zoom into my army once again to show you how many of my units are just doing nothing for the entire fight. They're just kind of having a little dance off here, seeing if they can intimidate the Zerg units with their incredible dancing skills. They were just doing nothing. Now I'm going to play that fight again and show you exactly how one-sided it was. And that fight should have gone one-sided in my favor, not the Zerg's favor. So I'll just go ahead and put this on a little faster speed because we've already seen this. I just want to show you, since I had it zoomed in, I was just looking at my units. Watch how much I just get completely owned here. I do manage to save some units and lift off and evacuate, but suddenly this is not looking nearly as good for me as it did before. And soon enough, I'm going to take another terrible engagement, and this engagement almost loses me the game. In fact, it really, in all honesty, should have lost me the game. Alright, here it is. Here is another terrible engagement. Once again, all these units doing absolutely nothing. These tanks are not really able to fire at that many units at once because he's able to have his units spread nice and thin. He's able to have a really great concave, and again, things are not looking good for me. The supplies look relatively even, right? And I actually have more supply than my Zerg opponent. If you're a Zerg and at any time a non-Zerg opponent has more supply than you, you know you're in trouble. You know that you are losing. However, if we just let this fight play through, it might look like I'm getting completely crushed here. So yes, some of his units are not doing anything, but he has far fewer units doing nothing than I do. And you can see he just completely dominates that army I had. And it looks like he's able to just kind of rush in and get the kill now. And here is where I'm going to demonstrate a good engagement for me. It looks like this army that he has right now should be able to just go and win the game. And that is what apparently our opponent is thinking as well. So he's going to just rush right up this ramp. And this, without being too mean, is not a very smart move. If your opponent has AoE damage, the last thing you want to do is get your units all clumped up and go up a ramp like this, because they will just be able to mow them down, which you are about to see here. So let's go ahead and put it on the slower speed, and just watch how this size army crushes this size army. To be fair, I did get a huge wave of reinforcements popping out right away, but even still, you can see these siege tanks remain untouched, and they were just able to rain down hell onto the Zerg army. And at this stage, apparently, I've figured it out, and I've decided, you know what, I've taken enough really terrible engagements, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen again. And you know what? It actually wins me the game here. Yes, spoiler alert, I did end up winning this game. So let's just go ahead and put it on faster. Again, I'm fast forwarding a lot this replay because it was a relatively long game, and I don't want to bore you too much by just having you watch 30 minutes of the Starcraft. So this engagement, again, I just mentioned how apparently I'd figured it out. Apparently, I forgot about this engagement. This engagement was, again, terrible for me, but thankfully I had enough of an overwhelming force and I had enough siege tanks in order to keep my army relatively alive. And also, if I do say so for myself, my macro has been pretty decent this game. I'm making something like 20 Marines at a time, so I'm able to reinforce pretty quickly. You can see 18 Marines in the production tab there. Now, why am I kind of hanging around this little giant rock here? This giant rock is not here just to look cool. It actually plays a very big impact on the map. Imagine my Zerg opponent was, you know, right here where he actually is, and he decided to just try to attack this. This rock means that his units would have to kind of split off. Now, normally splitting off and getting the larger concave is a good thing, but in this case where they can't attack from this angle, is actually better for me because it means that they're attacking in this choke and they have to walk all the way around here and then they can start attacking here. The entire time my tanks are just shelling away on them. It's kind of like, have you ever watched one of those movies where the hero is completely surrounded by bad guys, and if they just all went in at once, they would be able to completely overwhelm the hero, but instead they go in one by one so that, you know, they can just be defeated one by one? That's kind of the same concept here. If you can just funnel your opponent, especially if you have some form of AoE, like tanks, or like Storm, or say you're the Zerg and you have Banelings or fungal growth, that's really good for you. Also, if you just look at the supplies, you can see how over this game is, but I still would like to watch this fight just to show you, again, the difference that a good engagement can make. You're going to see, you might think that the only thing that matters is the siege tanks and making sure they do a lot of work. They're actually going to all get blinding clouded this game, and I'm still going to win this fight rather decisively. One, because I have a much bigger army, but two, just because I've positioned myself very well here. So here comes the final engagement of the game. You can see he gets blinding clouds all over my tanks. That should be really good for him, but for one, I have just so many more units, and for two, do you notice how when he attacked here, some of his units had to walk all the way up here, and then some of his units had to walk all the way down here, the entire time my units were firing upon them? That's why I was hanging around this giant rock thing and just wait patiently for my opponent to attack me. And as you can see, I just completely destroy his army here, and soon after this, GG will be called. So what do I want you to take away from this video of Let's Learn with Limbic? Make sure that you consider not only when you're attacking and what you're attacking with, but where you're attacking. If you have AoE, so say you have tanks, or you have Banelings, or you have Storm, or Colossus, whatever, try to make it so that your opponent is forced to fight in a situation where their units will be clumped up. So say you position your units here, and then just try and make your opponent attack through here, let's say. Or make them try to attack through here, or make them attack up a ramp. Because you will find that your units will be far more effective that way. Alright, that was this episode of Let's Learn with Limbic. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. That voice crack at the end was epic. Okay, we actually are recording. What a relief. It would totally be like me to shout out an entire episode and then realizing I wasn't even recording.